Somewhere in rural Louisiana, inside a small historical society that almost no one visits, there is a leather-bound journal locked inside a glass case. Most people walk past it without stopping. It does not look special. The cover is cracked, the pages are yellow, the ink has faded to the color of dried blood. But the words inside tell a story that was never meant to survive. For nearly 40 years, from 1826 to 1867, someone wrote down what happened to enslaved families after they were sold away from a place called Ridgefield Plantation. Not just names, not just prices, but where they were sent, what became of them, and in many cases, how they died. The entries are uneven. Some years list dozens of people. Other years are completely blank. And according to the few historians who have examined it closely, the handwriting changes at least 3 times. That alone should not be possible. During the antebellum South, enslaved people were not supposed to read or write. They were not supposed to keep records. They were not supposed to document the destruction of their own families across decades and across state lines. Yet this diary exists, and the question that haunts everyone who has studied it is simple and terrifying. Who was desperate enough to record something the world wanted erased? And why? Before we go any further, if you love untold historical mysteries and dark forgotten truths, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and turn on notifications. And tell us in the comments what state you are listening from. These stories belong to all of us. What makes this diary disturbing is not just what it records, but the care taken to record it. Someone risked everything to make sure these people were not forgotten. And the reason for that choice begins on a humid morning in June of 1826. That was the day 7 people were sold away from the only home they had ever known. Ridgefield Plantation sat about 12 miles northwest of Natchitoches, Louisiana. The land was heavy with moss-draped oak trees and red clay roads that turned to thick mud every spring. It was not one of the massive sugar plantations farther south. Ridgefield was considered mid-sized. About 400 acres, mostly cotton, some corn, and a herd of half-wild pigs that roamed the forest along the eastern edge of the property. The land was hard. The summers were brutal. Heat above 95 degrees was normal. The humidity pressed down on the body until breathing felt like work. Winters were unpredictable. A sudden freeze could destroy an entire crop and push a plantation toward ruin. By 1826, Ridgefield had been owned by the Grantham family for 2 generations. The original owner, Robert Grantham, had arrived from Virginia in the late 1700s and carved the plantation out of wilderness using borrowed money and enslaved labor. He died in 1818 and left everything to his son James. James Grantham was 34 when he inherited Ridgefield. He was known as a careful man, a precise man. His account books still exist today, and they are unsettling in their detail. He recorded weather patterns, soil conditions, livestock health, and expenses down to the penny. He recorded everything except the inner lives of the people he enslaved. By the standards of his time, James was not considered unusually cruel. He attended church. He paid his debts. He stayed out of court. That low standard mattered socially. But it did not make him kind. James married Catherine Dubose in 1820. She came from a respected family near Alexandria and brought a small dowry that helped stabilize the plantation. By 1826, they had 3 children: William, Margaret, and an infant daughter named Elizabeth. The main house at Ridgefield was a 2-story Greek Revival structure with white columns and wide galleries, designed to catch any breeze. Inside, it was modest for a plantation home. A piano, a small library, furniture that was solid but not extravagant. Behind the house, about 100 yards away, stood 8 log cabins. This was where the enslaved community lived. Each cabin was small, 1 room, dirt floor, a fireplace that smoked badly when the wind shifted. No windows, just wooden shutters, no locks on the doors. Privacy was not allowed. In 1826, there were about 36 enslaved people living at Ridgefield. Most had been born there. Some had been purchased as children from nearby plantations. The oldest was a woman called Aunt Bess, believed to be in her 70s. She had been at Ridgefield since the beginning. Despite everything, the community was tightly bound. Families had remained mostly intact. Children knew their parents. Siblings stayed together. Unofficial marriages were usually respected. Not out of kindness, but because stable families meant fewer escape attempts and more work done. Life followed the cotton cycle. Spring planting, summer weeding, fall picking from sunrise until darkness swallowed the fields. Winter ginning and repairs. The overseer, Silas Talbot, enforced this rhythm. Talbot was a thin man in his 40s with a sharp voice and a whip he did not hesitate to use. He lived between the main house and the cabins, positioned to watch both. Everyone understood that violence was always an option. And yet, within that terror, people built a life. Aunt Bess served as a healer and midwife. Elias from the stables was known for settling disputes. A woman named Rose led hymns on Sunday evenings, her voice carrying softly through the trees. Food was scarce. Cornmeal, salt pork, molasses. Never enough. People fished the creek, set traps, foraged when they could. This was home. Fragile, temporary, but home. And then, in June of 1826, something changed. 7 names appear in the diary for the first time. 7 people sold away. And next to those names, written in careful script, is a single word that appears again and again throughout the journal. Separated. In Part 2, we will follow those 7 names and uncover how the diary tracked them across state lines, plantations, and deaths. And why the person writing it knew things they should never have known. If this story moved you, subscribe, share it with someone who loves forgotten history, and leave a comment. These voices were nearly erased. Together, we make sure they are heard. Part 2. The day families were chosen. The children at Ridgefield were always thin. Not sickly, not weak, just thin in the way that comes from never having enough. Their ribs showed when they ran. Their clothes hung loose on their frames. Hunger lived quietly inside them, as normal as breathing. Punishment at Ridgefield was never written down. There were no rules posted anywhere. That was the point. Talking back to Overseer Talbot might earn a slap or a few lashes. Running away, or even trying to, meant a brutal whipping and often being sold far away. Stealing food could mean extra work, public humiliation, or pain. No one ever knew which punishment would come. The unpredictability kept everyone afraid. But there was one unspoken agreement that had held for years. Families stayed together. Work hard, keep quiet, do not cause trouble. And at night, your children would sleep beside you. Your husband or wife would be there when you returned from the fields. Your parents would grow old in the same dirt they were born into. It was not freedom, but it was something, and people clung to that something with everything they had. Then, in the spring of 1826, that fragile promise shattered. The trouble began far away, in places no one at Ridgefield would ever see. Cotton prices collapsed. In 1825, cotton sold for 14 cents a pound in New Orleans. By early 1826, the price had fallen to 9 cents and kept dropping. James Grantham had borrowed heavily 2 years earlier, believing the good times would continue. He bought new land, new equipment, 4 more enslaved people from an estate sale near Shreveport. When the market collapsed, his debts stayed the same. His income did not. To make things worse, Grantham had invested $2,000 in a cotton mill near Alexandria. It was supposed to be the future. Processing cotton locally instead of shipping it raw. The mill opened with celebration and confidence. By 1826, it was dead. Poor management, too little money, too much competition. The mill failed, and Grantham lost everything he put into it. By late spring, letters began arriving at Ridgefield. Demands for payment, threats of legal action, the Bank of New Orleans, local merchants, a cotton factor in Natchitoches who had advanced credit against a harvest that now would not cover the debt. $6,000 hung over the plantation like a storm cloud. Catherine Grantham begged her husband to sell land. Better to run a smaller plantation than lose it all. But James refused. Selling land felt like betrayal. His father had carved Ridgefield out of wilderness. James would not be the one to shrink it. So he made another choice. He decided to sell people. In May, word spread quietly through the parish that Grantham was liquidating assets. Neighbors assumed it meant equipment or livestock. Maybe one troublesome enslaved man. They were wrong. On the morning of June 6, 1826, a slave trader named Cyrus Webb arrived at Ridgefield. Webb was known across northern Louisiana and eastern Texas. He traveled with chains, a wagon, and 2 armed assistants. He was in his early 50s, heavy-set, with gray hair and eyes that showed no interest in suffering. He had been doing this for over 20 years. He arrived early, before the workday began. While James Grantham met with him inside the main house, Overseer Talbot gathered the enslaved community in the yard. Everyone understood immediately. You did not call a trader unless you planned to sell. They stood in the heat, waiting. Children pressed against their parents. Husbands stood close to wives. Aunt Bess whispered prayers under her breath. Elias watched carefully from the back, his face still. After nearly an hour, Grantham and Webb stepped outside. Webb moved down the line slowly. He did not rush. He examined people the way one inspects animals. He checked teeth, pressed muscles, asked ages, watched posture. He wanted prime workers. He ignored the elderly. He barely looked at young children unless they came attached to someone valuable. Then he stopped pointing. 7 people, not individuals, families. The first was Dinah, her husband Thomas, and their 2 daughters. Clara was 7, Bess was 5, Dinah was known for her strength and quiet dignity. Thomas was one of the strongest men on the plantation. The second family was Big Jack, his wife Mary, and their infant son. The baby was only 3 months old and did not yet have a name. Big Jack was young, tall, and powerful. Exactly what traders wanted. Mary was exhausted from childbirth. Terrified, clutching her baby like he might disappear. The third was Ruth and her teenage son Peter. Ruth had already been sold once in her life. Peter was 14, small, but quick, almost ready to become highly valuable. When Webb selected them, everyone understood. This was not discipline. This was not punishment. This was profit. Dinah began to cry silently. Thomas pulled his daughters close. Mary looked at Big Jack with pure fear in her eyes. Ruth said nothing. She already knew how this worked. Chains were brought out. The rest of the community watched as the 7 were pulled from the line. Mothers screamed quietly. Children reached back toward familiar faces. Talbot barked orders to keep everyone still. And somewhere, unseen, someone was watching closely. Someone who would later write down every name, every destination, every fate. In the next part, we follow these 7 families as they are marched away from Ridgefield and discover how the diary recorded details that no outsider should have known. If this story matters to you, subscribe to the channel. Share it so these voices are not lost again. And leave a comment telling us where you are listening from. History remembers what we choose not to forget. Part 3. The first letter that came back. No one slept the night after the wagon disappeared. The cabins at Ridgefield were filled with silence, the kind that presses on your chest and makes breathing feel heavy. The spaces where families had been were suddenly empty. No voices, no movement, just absence. Elias sat by his small fire long after the others lay down. He had lived on Ridgefield his entire life. He had seen people sold before. But never like this. Never whole families. Never chosen so cleanly and quickly, like numbers in a ledger. And he knew something else. Selling 7 people for $335 would not fix James Grantham's problems. If Grantham had accepted such a low price, it meant the situation was worse than anyone realized. This could happen again. Anyone could be next. That was when Elias made his decision. If people were going to be erased, someone had to fight back in the only way left. By remembering. The next morning, Elias went looking for Benjamin. Benjamin was 11 years old and worked in the main house. He carried water, cleaned rooms, ran errands. He was small, quiet, and watched everything. Over the past year, Elias had noticed something dangerous. The boy could read. Elias had seen him studying old newspapers when he thought no one was watching. His finger traced the lines. His lips moved silently. Literacy was forbidden, punishable, but Elias also knew that literacy was power. When Elias finally spoke to him, Benjamin froze. "You can read, can't you?" Benjamin said nothing at first. His face went pale. Then Elias promised him something rare. "I will not tell." That was enough. Benjamin admitted he could write too. Elias told him what he needed. A record, names, destinations. What happened to the people who were sold? Benjamin asked the obvious question. How would we know? Elias answered quietly. I will find out. Benjamin found a discarded ledger in James Grantham's study. A book abandoned because of a small accounting error. It was half empty. Perfect. He hid it under his mattress in the small room behind the kitchen. On June 8, 1826, the diary began. The handwriting was small and careful. Benjamin wrote only at night. Elias dictated. Every word felt dangerous. Every page felt like rebellion. At first, all they had were guesses and overheard words. Trader names, directions, rumors. Elias began asking questions whenever enslaved people from other plantations came through Ridgefield. Had they heard of Cyrus Webb? Did they know where he sold people? Some said rice plantations along the coast. Others mentioned sugar estates near Lafayette. Benjamin read advertisements in old newspapers. Slave sales, estate auctions, plantation notices. He searched for patterns, for clues. Then, in August, something happened that none of them expected. A letter appeared. It was found early one morning, tucked into the doorframe of a cabin. No one saw who delivered it. No one knew how it got there. Rose found it first. She could not read, so she brought it to Benjamin. Benjamin's hands shook as he opened it. The writing was uneven, the paper thin, the words few. We are near the coast. The work is rice and it is killing work. Thomas is sick with the fever. They have separated the girls. Clara and Bess are in the main house now doing kitchen work. I do not think we will see Ridgefield again. Tell Elias I remember. Tell everyone I remember. Dinah. The cabin filled with quiet sobs when Benjamin read it aloud. Dinah was alive. She had survived. And she had found a way to send word back. Elias understood immediately what this meant. Information could travel. Someone was helping her. 2 weeks later, the answer arrived in the form of a free black man named Daniel Hart. Hart came to Ridgefield to repair cabins. He was skilled, quiet, and careful. Born free, he moved between plantations doing work others could not. Elias waited, watched. When Hart was alone, Elias approached him. Did you carry a letter here from the coast? Hart did not answer right away. He studied Elias's face. Then he nodded once. I did. Hart explained everything in a low voice. He traveled between plantations for work. Enslaved people spoke to him quietly. Passed messages, letters, names. He memorized routes, faces, stories. He did not do it for money. He did it because someone had to. Hart had met Dinah on a rice plantation near Homa. The conditions were brutal, standing in water for hours. Disease everywhere. Thomas was sick. The girls had been taken into the house. Dinah begged Hart to carry a letter. He agreed. Elias asked the most important question. Would you carry more? Hart looked around, lowered his voice. Yes. From that moment on, the diary changed. It was no longer guesses and rumors. It became a network. Hart carried letters, returned with answers. Names appeared again and again in the ledger. Some survived, some did not. Thomas died before winter. Clara and Bess were sold again within a year. Peter was sent to a brickyard near Baton Rouge. He survived 2 years. Ruth disappeared completely. The handwriting in the diary began to change as time passed. Benjamin grew older. Others learned. Some entries were written by different hands. Different styles. Different fears. The diary became something living. And dangerous. By the 1840s, Ridgefield was no longer the same plantation. New owners, new overseers, but the diary continued, hidden, passed, protected, because as long as it existed, the people inside it had not vanished. In the next part, we will uncover how the diary survived raids, inspections, and near discovery, and how one mistake nearly destroyed everyone involved. If this story matters to you, subscribe to the channel. Share it so these voices are never erased again. And leave a comment telling us where you are listening from. History only survives when we choose to remember. Part 4. The diary that nearly got them killed. The most dangerous thing at Ridgefield was not the whip. It was being noticed. Every enslaved person learned this early. You survived by blending in. By working hard but not too hard. By speaking little. By never appearing clever. Attention brought questions. Questions brought punishment. And now, hidden beneath a thin mattress behind the kitchen, there was something that could destroy everyone if it was discovered. A diary. By the fall of 1826, the ledger Benjamin had stolen was no longer empty. Pages were filling with names, destinations, and grim updates. Some entries ended with hope. Many ended with silence. A few ended with death. Benjamin wrote only at night. He listened for footsteps, for the creak of floorboards, for Talbot's boots. Each word felt like it might be his last. Elias understood the risk better than anyone. He was older. He had seen what happened when enslaved people were suspected of organizing or communicating. Whippings, sales, disappearances, that were never explained. Yet he also knew this. Stopping now would mean letting the record die. Daniel Hart continued to visit Ridgefield every few months for repair work. Each time, he brought news from other plantations. Letters memorized, names whispered, information passed hand to hand like contraband. Sometimes the news was unbearable. By early 1827, confirmation came that Thomas had died on the rice plantation. Fever, overwork, buried in an unmarked grave near the fields. Benjamin wrote it down with shaking hands. Dinah survived, but her strength was failing. Clara and Bess had been sold again. Separate this time, one to a house in New Orleans, the other to a plantation upriver. Elias felt something hard settle in his chest. This was why the diary mattered. Without it, Clara and Bess would vanish. No one would know they had existed. No one would know they had been sisters. But danger was closing in. Overseer Talbot had begun to notice changes. Enslaved people were quieter, more watchful. Conversations stopped when he approached. He suspected plotting. He always did. In January 1827, Talbot searched the cabins without warning. He overturned bedding, dug through cooking pots, looked for stolen food, for weapons, for anything suspicious. Benjamin barely escaped disaster. The ledger had been hidden under loose floorboards earlier that week, moved on Elias's instruction. When Talbot entered the kitchen quarters, Benjamin stood perfectly still, his heart pounding so loud he was sure it could be heard. Talbot found nothing, but the warning was clear. That night, Elias called a small meeting. Only the most trusted, Rose, Benjamin, two others who had proven themselves careful. The diary could not stay in one place. They decided it would move constantly. Buried for weeks, hidden in hollow trees, passed between cabins, sometimes even left temporarily with Daniel Hart when he traveled. Each person memorized portions of it. Names, dates, places. If the book was destroyed, the memory would survive. This was not just record-keeping anymore. It was resistance. By the early 1830s, Ridgefield changed hands. James Grantham died suddenly of a fever. His son William inherited the plantation. William was younger, less careful, more violent. Under William, punishments increased. Sales became more frequent. The old agreement about families quietly disappeared. The diary grew thicker. The handwriting changed as Benjamin grew older and others learned to write in secret. Different styles appeared, different spelling, different fears. Some entries were rushed, some were neat and careful. Each reflected the person who wrote it. In 1834, the closest call came. A visiting preacher from Natchitoches stayed overnight at Ridgefield. He believed enslaved people should not read scripture for themselves. He insisted on inspecting the quarters for forbidden materials. The diary was hidden inside a sack of cornmeal, sealed and buried beneath the smokehouse floor. The preacher found nothing, but the fear lingered for weeks. By the 1840s, the diary had become something more than a record of Ridgefield. Names from other plantations appeared. People Daniel Hart met. Families sold from places far away. The network expanded quietly. Some free black workers helped. Some white laborers who could not read the words but knew their importance helped hide them. And some paid the price. In 1849, Daniel Hart disappeared. No body was found, no explanation given. Elias never learned what happened. But the letters stopped coming for months afterward. The diary entries during that time were short, sparse, full of unanswered questions. Then the Civil War came. Chaos swept through Louisiana. Armies moved. Plantations burned. Records were lost. Families scattered again. But the diary survived. It was hidden in a tin box, buried near the creek, dug up after the war by hands that remembered where it lay. The final entries were written in 1867. Names of people who walked away from Ridgefield for the first time without chains. Names of people who never returned. Names of people whose lives had been tracked when no one else cared enough to do it. Then the writing stopped. No explanation. No ending. Just silence. Today, the diary sits in an archive. Protected. Studied. Real. Proof that someone refused to let these lives disappear. In the next part, we will uncover what historians found when they tried to trace the names in the diary and why some entries still cannot be explained. If this story matters to you, subscribe to the channel. Share it so these voices are never lost again. And leave a comment telling us where you are listening from. History survives when we choose to remember. Part 5. The names that refused to stay buried. Some names are meant to disappear. That was the unspoken rule of slavery. When people were sold, scattered, and erased from records, it was as if they had never lived at all. No graves. No documents. No proof. That is why the diary should not exist. And that is why, when historians finally opened it more than a century later, what they found disturbed them deeply. The journal surfaced quietly in the early 1970s when a descendant of the last Ridgefield owner donated a box of old papers to a small historical society in rural Louisiana. Inside were land deeds, letters, account books, and one leather-bound ledger with no label. At first, archivists assumed it was another plantation record. They were wrong. The first historian to read it expected prices and inventories. Instead, she found names, families, ages, destinations, deaths, separated, written again and again. What shocked her most was the detail. This was not written from the perspective of an owner or trader. It was written from inside the enslaved community. The language was careful. Emotional restraint held every line. Grief pressed between the words. Even stranger, the handwriting changed over time. At least 3 distinct writers. Possibly more. Historians began cross-checking the entries. At first, they expected the diary to be symbolic rather than factual. A record of memory. A protest. But the names kept matching real documents. Dinah and Thomas appeared in a rice plantation inventory near Houma in late 1826. Thomas's death appeared in a plantation burial ledger the following year. Peter's name surfaced in a Baton Rouge brickyard accident report from 1828. An unnamed teenage boy killed when a kiln collapsed. The age matched. The timing matched. Mary appeared in a church baptism record years later. Alone. Her child was not listed. The deeper historians dug, the more uncomfortable they became. Some entries referenced events that had never been officially recorded. Sales that did not appear in bills of sale. Transfers that left no paper trail. Deaths that existed only in memory. And yet, again and again, small confirmations appeared. A name in a census margin. A plantation ledger footnote. A Freedmen's Bureau report after the war. The diary was not guessing. It was accurate. But then came the entries that made no sense. Several names appeared years after those individuals were believed to be dead. Updates written long after contact should have been impossible. One name appeared in 1854 with a note that simply read: "Seen alive near Vicksburg. Changed name. Has children." No source. No explanation. Another entry described a woman believed sold to Texas who later reappeared briefly at a river landing in Louisiana. Spoke to no one. Left no trace. The diary did not explain how this information traveled. It simply recorded it. Even more disturbing were the gaps. Entire years missing. Then sudden clusters of names written tightly together as if someone were racing against time. Some entries were neat and careful. Others were rushed and uneven. One page bore dark smudges that testing later revealed were blood. No explanation accompanied it. Historians also noticed something else. The diary never spoke about the writers. No names. No stories. No credit. Only the people being tracked mattered. It was as if the authors were deliberately erasing themselves. When scholars studied the later handwriting, they noticed something chilling. The spelling and grammar improved over time, suggesting education. But the tone grew colder. Earlier entries carried grief. Later ones carried something closer to resolve. This was no longer just memory. It was duty. The final confirmed entries dated to 1867 included lists of people who walked away from Ridgefield after emancipation. Some destinations were hopeful, others ended with the word unknown. And then the diary stopped. No celebration, no closing words, just silence. Researchers tried to trace what happened to the writers. They found nothing. No names connected clearly, no legal records, no census listings that matched. It was as if the people who created the diary vanished on purpose. That disappearance raised a terrifying question. What if the diary was never meant to be finished? What if it was meant to survive without its creators? In Part 6, we will explore the most unsettling theory surrounding the journal. That the diary may not have stopped because the story ended, but because the people protecting it were forced to choose between survival and truth. And what happened when the diary was almost destroyed for the last time? If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel. Share it so these forgotten names continue to be spoken. And leave a comment telling us where you are listening from. History only lives when we carry it forward. Strong, engaging hook. The journal should not have been there. It was buried beneath a loose floorboard, wrapped in rotting cloth, and stained with something dark that did not look like ink. As Elias pulled it free, the lantern beside him flickered hard, as if the house itself had taken a sudden breath. The final page was already open. And written in shaking letters were the words that made his blood run cold. If you are reading this, it means the house has chosen you next. Part 6. By 1871, the town of Black Hollow no longer trusted daylight. People still worked the fields and opened their shops, but every movement felt careful, slow, afraid. Doors were locked earlier. Windows were covered at night. Children were kept inside after sunset. Everyone had heard the stories, even if no one spoke them aloud. The Whitmore estate stood at the edge of town like a silent judge. Abandoned for decades, yet never truly empty. Fires had been seen burning inside with no one living there. Voices had been heard calling names of people long dead. And now, 6 people connected to the house had vanished in the last 3 months. Elias Carter sat alone in the parlor of the estate, the journal open on his lap. It had belonged to Reverend Thomas Whitmore, the original owner of the house. A respected man in public. A feared man in private, according to the faded entries. Each page described rituals disguised as prayer. Confessions forced in locked rooms. Punishments meant to cleanse sin but ending in death. The most terrifying part was not what Whitmore did, but how certain he was that God approved. Elias wiped sweat from his brow. This house was not haunted by random spirits. It was haunted by belief twisted into cruelty. A sudden knock echoed through the estate. Elias nearly dropped the journal. He stood slowly, heart pounding, and opened the front door to find Clara Monroe standing there, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "They took Samuel," she whispered. "Last night." Samuel was the schoolteacher, kind, quiet, one of the few who still spoke against the estate. Elias felt the truth settle like a stone in his chest. The house was active again. That night, they returned to the basement together. The air below smelled of damp earth and old smoke. The stone walls were scratched with symbols Elias recognized from the journal. Circles, crosses, names carved deep as if done in pain. In the far corner, behind an iron door, they heard breathing. Samuel was alive, barely. His clothes were torn. His wrists were marked with rope burns. His eyes stared past them, unfocused. "They're still here," Samuel whispered when Elias knelt beside him. "The brothers." Elias froze. "What brothers?" he asked. Samuel swallowed hard. "The ones Reverend Whitmore trained. They never left. They live between the walls." Before Elias could ask more, a deep bell rang somewhere above them. The sound shook dust from the ceiling. Samuel screamed, "They're coming back." Clara ran to the door, but it slammed shut on its own. The lantern went out, leaving them in darkness broken only by moonlight seeping through cracks in the stone. Footsteps began to circle them. Slow, deliberate, bare feet on stone. Elias remembered another journal entry. The faithful will guard the house long after my body fails. The brothers were not ghosts. They were men who had given themselves fully to Whitmore's belief. Men who believed suffering was holy. A match flared in the darkness. A face appeared. Hollow cheeks. Burned eyes. A smile carved by devotion. You do not belong here, the man said calmly. Elias stood between him and Clara. This ends tonight, Elias said, his voice shaking but loud. That house does not own this town anymore. The man laughed softly. This house owns souls. The brothers moved in unison. What followed was chaos. Clara smashed a lantern against the wall, flames roaring up the old wood beams. Smoke filled the basement. Elias dragged Samuel toward the door as fire spread fast, hungry after years of waiting. One brother grabbed Elias from behind, whispering prayers into his ear as Elias fought free. The heat became unbearable. Stones cracked. Screams echoed through the estate. They burst through the basement door just as the ceiling collapsed behind them. The Whitmore estate burned that night. From every corner of Black Hollow, people watched the flames rise. Some prayed. Some wept. Some smiled for the first time in years. By morning, the house was nothing but blackened ruins. Samuel survived, though his mind never fully returned. He would sit on his porch every evening, staring toward the ruins, whispering names. Elias believed it was over. He was wrong. 3 nights later, the bell rang again. Not from the estate, but from the church. And when Elias arrived, he found the final page of the journal waiting on the altar, freshly written. The fire was only a test. Faith must continue. If this story pulled you in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for the next part of this chilling historical horror series. Like the video if you felt the tension, share it with friends who love dark history, and comment below with your theories. Do you think the Whitmore evil is truly gone or has it only changed its shape? Strong engaging hook. The church bell rang 13 times. That was impossible. Black Hollow's bell had only 12 pulls. Everyone in town knew that. When the final echo faded into the cold night air, Elias Carter understood something terrifying. Whatever survived the fire at Whitmore Estate had grown bolder. And now it was calling the town to gather. Part 7. People arrived at the church in silence. Men carried lanterns. Women held their children close. No one spoke, but everyone felt the same fear pressing on their chest. The church doors stood wide open, swaying gently as if welcoming them in. Elias stepped inside first. The smell hit him immediately. Smoke and old wax mixed with something darker. Something rotten. The altar had been moved. In its place stood a wooden chair, stained and cracked, facing the pews. Behind it, painted directly onto the stone wall, was the same symbol Elias had seen carved in the Whitmore basement. A circle crossed by a broken line. They're turning the church into it, Clara whispered behind him. Before Elias could answer, the doors slammed shut. The crowd gasped as candles lit themselves one by one, flame crawling across the room without human touch. From the side door near the pulpit, a man stepped forward. Father Abraham Collins. He had served Black Hollow for nearly 20 years. A gentle voice. Kind eyes. A man people trusted with their sins and their dead. Elias felt his stomach drop. Father Collins smiled. My children, he said calmly, you have lived in fear because you misunderstand suffering. A murmur moved through the church. Elias shouted, step away from that wall. You know what it is. Father Collins looked at him with pity. I know exactly what it is. Reverend Whitmore was misunderstood. His work was incomplete. Clara grabbed Elias's arm. He's one of them. No, Elias whispered. He's worse. Father Collins raised his hand, and the church fell silent. The fire was meant to cleanse the house, he continued. But faith cannot burn. It only moves. At his signal, several townsmen stepped forward from the shadows. Elias recognized them. The butcher, the mill owner, 2 church elders, all wearing the same carved symbol around their necks. The brothers had not died. They had multiplied. Panic broke loose. People screamed. Someone rushed the doors, but they would not open. The windows slammed shut, sealed tight. Father Collins pointed toward the wooden chair. Tonight, the town will be forgiven. They dragged a young man from the crowd. Daniel Pierce. Barely 19. His crime was simple. He had tried to leave Black Hollow. Elias pushed forward, fighting through bodies. Stop this. This is murder. Father Collins met his eyes. It is devotion. The ritual began. Prayers twisted into chants. Candles flickered violently. Shadows stretched across the walls, moving against the light. Daniel screamed as they tied him to the chair. Clara grabbed a fallen lantern and smashed it against the stone floor. Fire spread fast across the wooden pews. Smoke filled the church, coughing and chaos erupting again. Elias lunged for Daniel, cutting the ropes with a knife he carried since the estate fire. The chair toppled backward as flames climbed the walls. Father Collins did not run. He stood smiling as fire surrounded him. You cannot destroy belief, he said calmly. You can only inherit it. The roof collapsed. People escaped through shattered windows. The church burned like a torch against the night sky. By dawn, it was gone. So was Father Collins. No body was found. Black Hollow tried to heal after that. The town buried its dead. Burned the symbols. Locked the remaining journals away. Some families left. Others stayed, pretending life could return to normal. But Elias knew better. Because the whispers had started. People heard prayers at night. Not from the ruins, but from their own homes. Children spoke words they had never been taught. Dreams showed fire, circles, and a man smiling in a burning church. One evening, Elias found a mark carved into his front door. The same broken circle. Inside his house, on his table, lay a new journal. Fresh pages, new ink, and written on the first page were the words that confirmed his worst fear. Part 7 is complete. The awakening has begun. If this story gripped you, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of this dark historical horror series. Like the video to support the channel, share it with friends who love creepy true-style stories, and comment below with your thoughts. Who do you think is truly leading the faith now, and can Black Hollow ever escape it? Strong engaging hook. The letters came first. Small scraps of paper, always at night, always folded into the shape of a cross. They appeared on doorsteps, in the fields, even inside the kitchens of Black Hollow. Every single one had the same message written in trembling letters. Faith watches. Obedience is survival. Elias Carter knew it was not a warning. It was a promise. Part 8. Weeks had passed since the church burned. Black Hollow tried to move on, but life felt wrong. People slept in fits, hearing whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Shadows moved too fast across walls. Dogs refused to enter certain yards. Children spoke words their parents had never taught them. Elias felt it everywhere. The sense that the Whitmore evil was not just surviving. It was spreading. One morning, he found another letter pinned to his window frame. The handwriting was familiar. Too familiar. It was not new, but older, with ink that had faded years before. They remember, the note said. They never forget. You are next. He showed it to Clara. She read it, her hand trembling as she touched the paper. They are testing us, she said quietly. Seeing who will break first. Elias nodded. He had seen the signs. Fires, shadows, the church, the symbols. It was all connected. It was all part of the same plan. And now it was personal. That evening, he went to the edge of town. The Whitmore estate had been reduced to rubble, but the forest around it was alive with movement. Leaves rustled in unnatural ways. Trees seemed to bend toward him. He stopped. There, half hidden behind a thick oak, he saw them. Two figures in dark clothing. Faces hidden. They carried lanterns. They whispered prayers in voices so low they were almost the wind. Elias approached slowly. Who are you? He called. The men stopped, turned, but did not answer. One of them raised a hand. Symbols appeared on the back of it, glowing faintly in the lantern light. Elias recognized them instantly. Whitmore's marks. The men disappeared into the woods. Elias followed. They moved too fast, vanishing and reappearing like ghosts. He kept going until the forest opened to a clearing he had never seen before. In the center was a stone altar. Symbols carved deep, circles crossed by lines, marks of devotion and terror. On the altar lay a human figure, covered in a dark cloth. The air was thick, suffocating. Elias could hear chanting around him, but could not see the people. Step closer, a voice whispered from everywhere and nowhere. Elias froze. Then he remembered the journal. The warnings. The entries from Whitmore himself about obedience, faith, and suffering. He remembered Samuel, Clara, and the others who had survived, barely. And he realized what they were doing. They were recreating the rituals. They were keeping the evil alive. Not just in buildings or symbols, but in the people of Black Hollow. A hand touched his shoulder. He spun around. Clara was there, her eyes wide, terrified, but determined. "We have to stop this," she whispered. Elias nodded. He knew she was right. They could not run anymore. The town was in danger. Everyone who remained could be next. They crept forward together. The chanting grew louder. Elias's heart pounded. Every step felt heavier. The ground beneath him seemed to thrum, as if the forest itself were alive. At the edge of the altar, he saw the figure. The cloth was pulled away. It was a young boy, no older than 12. His face pale, eyes wide, and carved into his forehead was the same broken circle symbol. Elias's stomach churned. This was no random victim. This was a child. They were feeding the evil with innocence. He looked at Clara. She nodded. They could not let this continue. He lunged toward the altar. The chanting stopped abruptly. A cold wind tore through the clearing, extinguishing the lanterns. Shadows twisted and lunged at them, but Elias held on to the boy. Clara grabbed his other hand. The ground shook. Symbols on the altar glowed brightly. A scream echoed from deep in the forest, high and terrible, shaking Elias's very bones. Then silence. The boy whimpered. Elias held him tightly. Clara helped lift him as they ran. They did not look back. The forest seemed endless, but the symbols did not follow. When they finally emerged into the light of the village, they collapsed. Breathless, covered in dirt and sweat. The boy clung to Elias, shaking but alive. No one spoke at first. The town had been watching from a distance. Whispers spread quickly. People realized that the Whitmore legacy was not gone. It was still here, in those willing to carry it forward. But for the first time, someone had fought back. Someone had saved a child. Elias knew this was only the beginning. The journals would have to be found, the rituals studied, and the town prepared. Because the evil was patient. It would wait. It would test. It would strike again. And yet, for the first time in years, Elias felt a spark of hope. Because faith was not just power in their hands. It could also be courage. And courage, he realized, could burn brighter than fear. If this part kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe for the next chapter of this dark historical horror story. Like the video if you felt the tension, share it with friends who love chilling mysteries, and comment below. Tell us what you think the Whitmore evil will do next and how Black Hollow can survive it. If you want, I can immediately write part 9 next, keeping the story escalating toward its terrifying climax. Do you want me to do that? Strong engaging hook. The wind carried whispers that no one could trace. By now, the town of Black Hollow understood one truth. The evil of Whitmore was not gone. It had grown, spread, and it was hungry. And now, it was coming for them all. Part 9. Elias Carter could feel it in his bones. Every shadow in Black Hollow seemed to move when no one was looking. Every lantern flicker was a warning. The forest outside town, once silent, now hummed with a presence that was patient, cruel, and ancient. The boy they had saved was asleep in Elias's house, but Elias could not rest. Clara sat across from him, staring at the map of Black Hollow spread on the table. Pins marked every location where symbols had been found, every burned cabin, every whispered report of strange chanting. "It's like a network," Clara said quietly. "Whitmore left instructions everywhere. People don't even know what they're following. They just do what the journal says." Elias nodded. He had read the journals. The pages were filled with diagrams, incantations, and notes in Whitmore's careful hand. But there were gaps, spaces where Whitmore had left no instructions. Those gaps were dangerous. They were unpredictable. "Tonight," Elias said, "we stop it. Or we die trying." They gathered what supplies they could. Lanterns, knives, rope, the boy's small pack of belongings. Then they headed toward the clearing where Elias had last seen the altar. He did not know if the followers would be there again, but he suspected they would return. The forest was silent at first. Too silent. Birds did not chirp. The wind had died. Every step felt like walking on fragile ice over a deep abyss. Then, from behind, the chanting started again. Low, rhythmic, rising and falling. It was closer this time. Elias motioned for Clara and the boy to hide behind a large oak. He crept forward. The clearing was empty, but symbols had appeared on the trees, carved in haste. The same broken circles that had haunted the town for months. A sudden movement in the shadows made him spin. Figures emerged. 5 of them, faces hidden, hands raised, chanting. Father Collins was not among them, but Elias knew he had trained these people. Taught them, turned them into followers. Elias stepped into the clearing and shouted. Stop this now. The chanting faltered. The figures turned, eyes glinting in the lantern light. One moved forward, holding a journal bound in black leather. Elias recognized it instantly. That is Whitmore's final work, the figure said. Voice deep, controlled, and it belongs to the rightful followers. You're killing innocent people, Elias said. You are spreading fear. You are the evil. This has to end. The figure laughed. It was hollow, echoing through the trees. Innocence is temporary. Fear is eternal. The town will learn obedience or it will burn. Elias gripped his knife. Clara whispered, We can do this, Elias. We have to destroy the journal. He nodded. They crept closer. One figure turned away to adjust the symbols on the altar. Clara lunged and grabbed the journal. The chanting stopped. A cold wind tore through the clearing. Lanterns flickered and went out. Shadows twisted violently, forming shapes that moved independently of the figures. Elias felt a hand grip his shoulder. The boy screamed. He looked down to see the shadows reaching for them, tendrils of darkness curling around their legs. He slashed with the knife, cutting through the air. The shadows hissed, recoiling from the journal in Clara's hands. Clara tore the cover open. The pages glowed faintly. Whitmore's handwriting was elegant, cruel, precise. She ripped page after page, throwing them into the fire Elias had built nearby. Flames licked the night sky. The glow from the pages intensified, then vanished as the paper burned. The shadows screamed, high and piercing. The followers fell to the ground, clutching their eyes and mouths. When the fire consumed the last page, the wind died, the lanterns relit themselves, and the clearing fell silent. Elias dropped to his knees, gasping. Clara hugged the boy tightly. He looked around. The followers were gone. No one remained. The altar was empty except for ashes and scorched earth. Is it over? Clara whispered. Elias shook his head. It's not over. Whitmore's evil is tied to the land. The journals are gone, but the legacy remains. There will always be whispers. Always shadows. The boy, small and trembling, looked up at Elias. Will it come back? Elias held him close. We fight it, he said. We fight it every day. And we survive. That's how we win. They returned to the town at first light. People emerged cautiously. They had heard the fire, seen the glow, but no one had seen Elias, Clara, or the boy leave the forest. Black Hollow was alive but changed. Eyes watched the edges of the trees. Families clung to each other. Doors were locked, but hope had returned, fragile as it was. Elias knew what had to happen next. He had to teach the town to resist. To understand the signs. To recognize fear and face it. Whitmore's plan had relied on obedience, on terror. Now the people had seen resistance. Now they had a chance. He began gathering the survivors, teaching them what he had learned. Symbols could be destroyed, rituals could be broken, shadows could be fought with courage. And the journals, the source of so much fear, were gone forever. But in the quiet moments, when the wind shifted and the shadows seemed to bend, Elias could feel the pulse of Whitmore's presence. Waiting, patient, calculating, the final confrontation would come. The town had to be ready. Elias looked at Clara and the boy. He knew the time was coming when they would face the evil directly. They would have to enter the heart of the forest, the original Whitmore estate, and confront whatever remained of the curse. Only then would Black Hollow truly be free. And as the sun rose over the town, casting light on broken doors and scarred walls, Elias whispered a promise to himself and to the survivors. We will not let them win. Not now. Not ever. If you were on the edge of your seat reading this part, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the terrifying final chapter of this historical horror series. Like the video if it gave you chills, share it with friends who love dark historical mysteries, and comment below. Tell us what you think is left in the forest and how Black Hollow can survive the final confrontation. I can now craft part 10, the epic finale, bringing the story to a shocking and satisfying conclusion. Do you want me to create it next? Strong engaging hook. The forest was alive with shadows, older than any living thing. For Black Hollow, tonight was the night everything would be revealed. The secrets, the horrors, the terror that had haunted them for decades, all of it would come crashing down. And only the brave would survive. Part 10 Final Chapter. Elias Carter stood at the edge of the forest, heart hammering in his chest. Beside him, Clara held the boy's hand tightly. The townspeople had gathered behind them, reluctant but determined. They had been trained. They had seen the horrors. They had survived the night terrors, the disappearances, the whispers. But nothing could have prepared them for what lay ahead. The clearing at the center of the forest was hidden beneath a thick canopy. The old Whitmore estate had long since decayed into ruin. Moss draped every surface. Trees had grown through the floorboards. Broken windows stared like hollow eyes. And at the heart of it all, the altar remained, scarred with symbols that seemed to pulse in the dim light. Elias stepped forward. The air was thick, heavy with a metallic scent, like blood and wet earth. Shadows moved along the walls and trees, reaching toward him as if they were alive. But he did not falter. Clara and the boy followed. Behind them, the townspeople crept silently, clutching lanterns, knives, and courage. Stay together, Elias whispered. And whatever happens, do not run. Fear is what it feeds on. They reached the altar. The remnants of burned journals littered the ground. Elias's eyes scanned the area, searching for any sign of life. The shadows coalesced suddenly, rising like smoke. Faces appeared in them, twisted and cruel. Some were followers from the town. Some were strangers from decades past. All were trapped in Whitmore's curse. A voice echoed, deep and resonant. You should have left the past buried. You should have obeyed. Clara raised the journal she had carried since the forest fire months ago. It was the final copy, handwritten and unburned. The source of the curse, Elias realized, was not just the ritual, not just the symbols, it was the knowledge. Whitmore had recorded everything, and that knowledge had power. You do not scare us, Elias said, his voice steady. We remember, and remembering does not make us weak. It makes us strong. The shadows hissed. The figures moved closer, clawing, reaching. The townspeople held their ground, forming a line behind Elias and Clara. They chanted a counter prayer they had learned, a combination of old hymns and protective words taught by Elias and the boy. The shadows recoiled. The boy, small but brave, stepped forward. He lifted the journal high. Words written in ink that seemed blacker than the night itself shimmered and burned as the boy spoke aloud the names of the enslaved, the disappeared, the forgotten. The names echoed through the forest. Dinah, Thomas, Clara, Bess, Big Jack, Mary, Peter, Ruth, all the lives recorded in the stolen journals came alive in voice, in memory. The shadows screamed. Faces twisted in fury. The ground shook. Trees groaned as though in pain. But Elias and the others stood firm. They repeated the names. Each name weakened the shadows. Each remembered life broke the curse a little more. And then, as the first light of dawn touched the forest, the shadows began to dissipate. Figures that had terrorized Black Hollow for decades fell into mist. Faces that had haunted dreams faded. The forest itself seemed to exhale, releasing the terror it had held for generations. Elias fell to his knees, gasping. Clara knelt beside him. The boy hugged her tightly. The townspeople, some crying, some laughing with relief, emerged from the edge of the clearing. The forest was quiet, peaceful, for the first time in decades. Elias looked at the altar. The symbols were still there, carved into stone, but they no longer glowed. They no longer pulsed. Whitmore's evil had been broken, not destroyed, but weakened. The journals had been read aloud, and their power, tied to secrecy and fear, was gone. Clara turned to the group. We did this together. Remembering saved us. The boy, holding Elias's hand, asked, will it ever come back? Elias looked at the ruins, the trees, the forest beyond. Maybe. Darkness never truly disappears. But so long as people remember, so long as we do not obey fear blindly, it cannot win. The townspeople began clearing the ruins. They collected the burned pages, the remaining journals, and buried them deep beneath the earth. They planted new trees over the site. Life would continue. Black Hollow would heal. Weeks later, Elias and Clara walked through the town. Children played where whispers had once filled the air. People smiled cautiously, no longer hiding from shadows. And in the quiet moments, Elias wrote. Not a journal for the living, but a record for the future. For anyone who might face Whitmore's darkness again. He recorded names. He recorded stories. He recorded the horrors and the bravery. Memory had power, and he would ensure that it was passed down. Black Hollow had survived the worst. They had confronted history's horror, faced the shadows, and endured. Whitmore's legacy would never be erased. But the town had learned a truth more powerful than fear. Elias looked at Clara and the boy, a faint smile on his face. We faced it. We survived. And we remember. That is enough. The sun rose higher. Birds chirped. The wind blew softly through the trees. Shadows were gone, but memory remained. And memory was stronger than any darkness. Black Hollow was free. And for the first time in decades, it felt like home. If you felt chills reading this epic finale, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss dark historical stories like this. Like this video if it gave you goosebumps, share it with friends who love mysteries from the past, and comment below telling us which part of Black Hollow's story terrified you the most.